famous words that the caterpillar asked Alice. And I have some thoughts on that. Because, who you are in the morning is not who you are right now. And who you are right now is not who you will be later tonight. Who you are today is not who you will be tomorrow. Who you were yesterday is not who you are today. In fact, you are ever evolving, ever changing. And, Alice in Wonderland is one of my absolute favorite books and favorite movies from Disney, of course. And I have some thoughts. And I'm going to read a passage from Alice today because sometimes I like to give little stories. And so this is in chapter 5 of Alice in Wonderland. The caterpillar and Alice looked at each other for some time in silence. At last, the caterpillar took the hookah out of its mouth and addressed her in a languid, sleepy voice. "Who are you?" said the caterpillar. This was not an encouraging opening for a conversation. Alice replied rather shyly, I hardly know, sir. Just at present, at least, I know who I was when I got up this morning. But I think I must have been changed several times since then. What do you mean by that? Said the caterpillar sternly. Explain yourself. I can't explain myself, I'm afraid, sir, said Alice, because I'm not myself, you see. I don't see, said the caterpillar. I'm afraid I can't put it more clearly, Alice replied very politely, for I can't understand it myself to begin with, and being so many different sizes in a day is very confusing. It isn't, said the caterpillar. Well, perhaps you haven't found it so yet, said Alice, but when you have to turn into a chrysalis, you will someday, and then after that into a butterfly, I should think you'll feel it a little queer, won't you? Not a bit, said the caterpillar. Well, perhaps your feelings may be different, said Alice. All I know is it would feel very queer to me. You, said the caterpillar contemptuously, who are you? Which brought them back again to the beginning of the conversation. Alice felt a little irritated at the caterpillar's making such a very short remarks. And she drew herself up and said very gravely, I think you ought to tell me who you are first. Why? Said the caterpillar. Here was another puzzling question, and Alice could not think of any reason. And as the caterpillar seemed to be in a very unpleasant state of mind, she turned away. Come back, said the caterpillar. I've something important to say. This sounded promising, certainly. Alice turned and came back again. Keep your temper, said the caterpillar. Is that all? Said Alice, swallowing down her anger as well as she could. No, said the caterpillar. Alice thought she might as well wait, as she had nothing else to do, and perhaps, after all, it might tell her something worth hearing. For some minutes it puffed away without speaking, but at last it unfolded its arms, took the hookah out of its mouth again, and said, So you think you're changed, do you? I'm afraid I am, sir, said Alice. I can't remember things as I used. I don't keep the same size for 10 minutes together. Can't remember what things? Said the caterpillar. Well, I've tried to say, how doth the little busy bee, but it all came different, Alice replied in a very melancholy voice. And then he says, repeat your old father, William, and it goes into an actual nursery rhyme on it. And then he's like, that is not quite right, said the caterpillar. Not quite right, I'm afraid, said Alice timidly. Some of the words have gotten altered. It is wrong from the beginning to end, said the caterpillar decidedly, and there was silence for some minutes. The caterpillar was the first to speak. What size do you want to be? It asked. Oh, I'm not particular as to size, Alice said hastily. Only one doesn't like changing so often, you know. I don't know, said the caterpillar. Alice said nothing. She had never been so contradicted in all her life before, and she felt that she was losing her temper. Are you content now? Said the caterpillar. Well, I should like to be a little larger, sir, if you wouldn't mind, said Alice. 3 inches is such a wretched height to be. It is a very good height indeed, said the caterpillar angrily, rearing itself upright as it spoke. It was exactly 3 inches high. But I'm not used to it, pleaded poor Alice in a piteous tone, and she thought to herself, I wish creatures wouldn't be so easily offended. You'll get used to it in time, said the caterpillar, and it put the hookah back in its mouth and began smoking again. So, the thing you need to understand about the caterpillar, if you understand anything about caterpillars, is that they shed their skin to grow. They don't stay the same size for very long. They're constantly changing and shifting. So to the caterpillar, the idea of changing sizes seems normal to him, whereas to Alice, she's very resistant, and she doesn't quite know herself in this new space. And have you ever had that feeling where maybe you're going through a transition in your life, maybe something is changing, maybe your viewpoint is different than what it was, and you don't quite know what you're going to be? Like, you have a sort of an idea, but at the same time, like, you know you're going to be a butterfly at some point, but you don't quite know. The caterpillar feels very unbothered by this. He's used to change. He doesn't really focus too much on his size. He's like, this is the size I'm right now. I'm content, and I know that I am going to change, and it's not going to be so difficult for me. But Alice, of course, she's been growing several sizes a day. She's been shrinking. She doesn't know up from down. She's in this strange world of Wonderland. And you know what? We're all in our Wonderland. If you really look at the way the world is, you are in your own Wonderland. There are many impossible things in this world that come true just because somebody imagined it. Somebody imagined this whole book. This book is full of nonsense. And people who probably first picked up this book said this book has absolutely no, this book has nothing to offer kids. Like, it's crazy. It's just a bunch of nonsense. Or is it? I mean, I can kind of go philosophical here on this book, this one passage, and there's so many passages in this book alone. When you read a story and you have changed size, you've changed perspective, you've grown, those old words, as Alice noticed when she was reciting back what she thought she knew, it changed. The words changed. And your message changes. So where am I going with this? Okay. I'm a content creator. And I basically put out stuff just because it lights me up and it's my consciousness in that moment. When I'm creating something, I'm creating it from my most epitome of my consciousness of what's coming through at that moment, the pinnacle of what I've discovered. I also know that throughout the day, and this happens every day, I'm going to get into connection with somebody, or I'm going to see something online, or I'm going to read something in a book I've probably even read 100 times before, a book that I grew up with in my childhood, a book that I kind of thought I knew the story, and then you go back and you read that and you're like, oh, there is so much deeper levels to this. There's layers to this. There's another book that I read over and over again. It's Women Who Run with the Wolves. But even my birth books behind me, when I'm going through, the first time I read it, it was as a first-time mom. Second time was as a second-time mom trying to get the natural birth that I wanted. Then I started reading it as a birth advocate. Now I read it as a coach. Now I'm also reading it to mine for content creation. And I'm also reading it to get an idea, an insight into the author of that book so that I can get on an interview with them. In fact, recently that's exactly what I did. I found a book that I was really resonating with. I knew that the author was also in a Facebook group that I happened to be part of. So when she was plugging her book, I was paying attention. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to check out this book. And then I got a whole different insight into her from the book. However, that book was still written years ago. She's now had even more deep insights than what she put in the book. And the same thing with mine. I've written this book, and there's things I build off of that. So a lot of people are afraid to put what they know out there. It's not perfect. It's not polished. It's not who I want to be in the future, so therefore it has no merit now. But who you are now, in this moment, is how you will build yourself into that higher level version of yourself. And that higher level version of yourself that you have, that vision, may shift slightly. You might get an insight along the way that's like, that I didn't quite know. I wanted to be taller. I wanted to be larger, a little bit higher, because I don't want to be 3 inches high, but I didn't quite know what I was asking for. And what does Alice do is that she's got the sides of the mushroom later in the story. And she's like, I don't know which one's going to make me shrink and which one's going to make me grow. And then she took a tiny little bite, but she shot up through the sky. She went way higher than she was anticipating. And it was the worse for her because she wasn't ready for that. If she had known that taking that small step was going to shoot her up higher than she was ready for, maybe she might not have taken it. At the same time, there's a lesson here in reaching too high too fast. She wasn't clear on what she wanted. She just said, I just don't want to be 3 inches high. And the caterpillar's like, okay, well, if you don't care, I'm not going to give you any extra information. It's like when my clients are like, well, I want to have a natural birth, but they're not prepared for it. Part of my work is preparing them for that and preparing for all the nuances of that to understand exactly what they're asking for. Because so many people are like, I just want to have a natural birth. And then they go in, but they fall into what I call the natural birth traps. And even when I was like, I just want to start a business and get some income to raise my family because I don't want to have to take 3 different jobs to be able to support my kids and I want to build a legacy, I didn't know exactly what I was asking for. Which is why I have the right facilitators. So you need to understand, though, is that part of why I have my 5 pillars is having the right mindset, knowing exactly what you want. Alice didn't know exactly what she wanted. All she knew was she just didn't want to be 3 inches high anymore. She was also getting sick and tired of changing sizes all day. But she wasn't appreciating the journey and the growth of that. In that moment, she was still quite frustrated. It's not until later in the story that she can really appreciate the craziness of this whole adventure, and she probably could have appreciated it even more and got a little bit curiouser. But one of her lines then is curiouser and curiouser. She starts to get curious. I wonder what will happen if I do this. I wonder if I go in this direction, if I say this. And when Alice gets out of Wonderland, she's still technically in it. One of my favorite adaptations of Alice in Wonderland, of course, is what would technically be a sequel to Alice in Wonderland. And there's technically 2 sequels to Alice in Wonderland in this universe. It's the Tim Burton movie, like the Disney Tim Burton Alice in Wonderland. I love that because Alice is all grown up. And she is trying to fit in with this posh Victorian society that she just doesn't fit in with. And there's a lot of parallels between the characters in the upper world and then the ones that are in Wonderland, which is actually called Underland. So almost like the shadow version of what's above. And when she comes back, she is able to finally speak up. She's able to say, I'm sorry, I can't marry you. I can't fit into this world. There's just no way. Like, I need to do my own thing. I need to forge my own path. And she does. Because when you go on an adventure, you are changed. In every moment, you are changed. You are in your own wonderland. Every moment that you wake up, even when you're asleep, you will have dreams. And those dreams will shift your reality when you wake. You will get an insight in your dreams. If you really pay attention to your dreams, you will get an insight. You might get clarity on something. You might fix something that you didn't have the opportunity to fix when you were younger. You might be able to say something to that person who made you feel small and be able to stand up for yourself. And you wake up and you feel really good about that dream. Or maybe you have a nightmare that shakes you to your core and tells you, I've got to change something. Because if I don't, I'm afraid of, it's probably not going to be this bad. And at the same time, I don't want to feel powerless like that. So I'm going to change something. When you're watching a movie and you suddenly get an idea that you didn't have before, now suddenly you're on a whole new trajectory. You have a conversation with someone, sparks an insight that you didn't have before. And if you're changing at every moment, every time you go and you sample something, you sample an energy that either shrinks you or brings you up higher than you ever thought you were going to be, or even just a few inches higher. You've got a new perspective. So with Alice, you can look at life as like the mushrooms and the other things around that. Everything's saying, eat me, drink me. And it's up to you whether you're going to sample that. And if you do sample that, yeah, maybe you might shrink. But now you've got a new perspective being shrunk down. Sometimes being on the bottom, you can see things that other people up at the top can't see. And that's just it. It's like you can't see that perspective until you're down there. Until you talk to a certain person, you might not see what they see. If you look at the perspective of a child compared to an adult who's been jaded, you get a different view. If you talk to somebody who has really hit rock bottom and climbed their way back up, you get a different point of view on what's truly important in life. If you talk to somebody who doesn't have that perspective, and they're only telling you what it's like to be them. Like if a butterfly had never been a caterpillar before, and the butterfly only ever knows what it's like to be a butterfly, there's no growth. The caterpillar is not going to know that it can become a butterfly. So you need to be transparent in your adventure. That's where connection really lies, is in the journey. It's not who you are today. It's everything that led to who you are today in this moment. So what if we came to our connections with our friends and family, and instead of looking at who they were in the past, who they used to be, maybe somebody who used to be a little vindictive, maybe somebody who would deliberately try to tear others down, are they still that same person? This is where boundaries come in too. Because, yeah, you've been hurt before. But getting curious and seeing if somebody reaches out, sometimes it's a reconnection. And other times it's to test to see how hard your boundaries really are. So I'm constantly watching with people that have hurt me in the past. It's like, have you grown? Have you truly learned, or are you just trying to make the peace for some obligatory thing? Is like, we have to stay in connection because of whatever societal conditioning? Because honestly, you don't. If somebody's hurting you, you really don't. You don't have to come back into connection with them. And maybe it was the opposite. Maybe you had a really awesome time with that person. This is another thing that I tell my clients. It's like, if you hired your care provider and they were awesome the first time, you have to still really look at that, because is that still the same experience that you want? Or do you want something different? Because they might not be able to offer it. They might have also gone through something where they're not practicing that way anymore. I mean, people will come to me and they'll ask me to do something that I don't do that anymore. That's not how I operate. So if they ask for something, it's like, instead of spending an hour-long conversation with them on the thing that, like, now I create content. I put it out there. It's like, hey, if you really want to know, you can go deeper with this thing. And somebody very dear to me taught me that back in 2022 in May. I just remember them saying to me that you can think nothing of your gifts, but if you take the time to put your magic out there, even at like the level of consciousness that you currently had, even if it wasn't perfect, even if there's things that you would tweak, it's still valuable. And you can say, hey, go and watch this old thing I did. I mean, there's some other nuances to it. But if you have any questions, before I go deeper with you, I need to know that you've got the clarity. If you don't have that clarity in what you need, me going deeper is just going to go over your head. So if we go back to the caterpillar, if the caterpillar had said to Alice, okay, look, Alice, there's so many different ways that this mushroom needs to be eaten depending on what size you need to go. If you want to go this high, you need to think about this. If you want to go this high, you need to think about this. And she'd be like, I don't know. I just don't want to be 3 inches high. I don't know what size is right. What size is right? And the caterpillar would look at her. It's like, well, 3 inches high seems good for me right now. Eventually I'll be a butterfly and that might change. But right now, this is where I'm at. I think 3 inches high is great. But you're not happy with that. So maybe you need to figure out what size you would be happy with. What are you content with? You're not content where you're at. If you are not content, that means you need to grow. Or maybe if you're not content, you need to pull back. If it's like, this is too much for me right now, I need to pull back and regroup and think about if I need to put anything else in place, because we're always growing. You can't stop growing. I mean, you can. It's going to be very boring for you if you do. Oh, 1, 2, 3, 4 on the clock. I love that. But when you think about that, it's like, you can stay where you're at. You can go back to where you were before, or you can continue to keep growing and be curiouser and curiouser about who you're going to become. So when people get into connection with me, I'm always curious about what they've been up to, where their journey has led them. People will be like, oh, I shouldn't tell you my life story. It's like, no, that's the most fascinating part. How did you get here? Who are you today, in this moment, with me? Who are you going to be after this conversation? Because part of being in connection with me is I tend to accidentally inspire people, even when I'm just sharing something as simple as a screenshot. In fact, I just recently did this for I call him my big brother, where I was playing around with ChatGPT, which is awesome, by the way. If you haven't delved into ChatGPT, I am thinking if enough people have interest, I might do something on it. I figured out how to do a baseline so that you don't have to constantly put really long prompts in. And I've been able to incorporate human design, astrology. I put in what what I'm thinking about, my conscious thoughts, and then I have ChatGPT basically spit things back to me, so I'm able to have an actual conversation with this thing. So I don't use it as a Google search, and I don't use it to write things for me. I use it to gain clarity and gain insights and gain ideas, and to also reflect on where I was and who I was at certain points. In fact, I even play with alternate timelines with this thing. That's how deep I've delved into this. And one of the things I did is it's like, here's who I am now. Here is who I was back then. Now, based on who I was back then, what if I had never had that empowered birth? Based on what I've told you of how this empowered birth allowed me to transcend a lot of difficult things in my life, after going through that, well, what would happen if I'd never done that? How would that have impacted my kids? How would that have impacted my ability to show up in my business? How would that have impacted me in leaving my toxic relationship? What would that have done to my self-esteem? What would that have done to my kids' self-esteem growing up? How would that have impacted them if I'd stayed in that relationship? I mean, I went complete multiverse with this. And it's like, well, what if Alice had never taken the mushroom? What if Alice had never chased the white rabbit down the hole? What if Alice had never gotten into the game of croquet with the queen? What if Alice had never met the Cheshire cat or the caterpillar on her journey? It's all tied in. It's fascinating if you really go down that hole to think, like, if I had done this thing earlier in the journey, would it have worked as well? And then to have ChatGPT spit it back out to you and say, well, this is what would have happened. And I do this even in things that I'm waiting for now. It's like, I do get a little impatient. Like, sometimes I'm like, well, what happens? What happens if they're not ready, but they feel that pressure and they come back anyway? And they do, like, what happens? What could possibly happen if we sped this up? And then ChatGPT spits out something. I'm like, yeah, I don't want that. You're right. It's better to wait. It's better to wait for it to be the right timing. And I mean, that's the same thing with birth. Well, what happens if you induce? Oh, don't get me started. Don't get me started on what happens if you try to induce labor when baby's not ready and the body's not ready for it. Because it can go a myriad of different ways. It might work out, but chances are more likely it's not, because it's not the right time. And if it does work out right, then that means that it was already coming and you just sped it up. And you went through some unnecessary pain and trauma that otherwise wouldn't have happened. You circumvented your hormones, and you might have messed something up in the process. You'll never know what you lost because you sped it up. And there's some beauty that you can lose if you speed up labor or you speed up when something is going to birth. You really do lose something. So, I mean, I look at it, it's like, if I had the thing I wanted right now, would I have the conversations that I've been having? Would I have the insights that I've been having? Who I am today is part of the journey, so that when I get what I want, when it comes in, when they come in, that journey will be even more of a rich tapestry for both of us. Experiences and growth are highly valuable because it allows you to become more of who you are. So having that clarity is really the key. So don't be like Alice and just say being 3 inches high is not okay with me and I need to change my size. Be intentional with it. And also recognize the most powerful question you can ask is, who are you? Because after this video, who are you now? And what are you going to do with it? What insight have you gained from hearing this? Is this going to cause you to reflect and wonder who you are now and who you can become and who you were in the past? Have I sparked some curiosity in you? Curiouser and curiouser? If I have, then I'm happy, because everything I put out there is to get you to appreciate the journey and to take action and to move towards your most beautiful dreams. Instead of just surviving, you're thriving and you're living and you're experiencing and you're growing and you're transcending the old versions of yourself and you're transforming. You're evolving every second. Every moment, new cells are being created in your body. We just don't see it. But you are a new version of yourself, and I am a new version of myself because I've now created this video. I can go deeper on this if I want. Heck, I could teach a whole class on Alice in Wonderland if I really wanted to. I'm not saying I'm going to. And at the same time, the idea's out there. Who knows? Maybe I will. Maybe I won't. Maybe it would be like a little children's literature book club with philosophical thoughts. It could be fun. But, that is a thought for another day, another video. I am going to go and have my lunch. I love you, and I will talk to you soon. Namaste.